Hey everyone. Your films were absolutely incredible. Bravo to all of you. It's interesting, this particular group had the most information and really explored some important processes, and I think it's really going to resonate with audiences. Let's just go around and say your name, title of your film, and a little about yourself in the film. Ben, let's start with you.
Cool. I'm Ben Hemmings. I made the film Grazed Right, and the film is about a farmer, Ben Campbell, and he's trying to restore the grasslands of Alberta, Canada, which is one of the most endangered ecosystems in North America. I think there's something like 1% or under 5% of grasslands, native grasslands left in North America. And he's doing that by grazing cattle in a regenerative way. So every single day he moves the cattle around his ranch. And the film follows him over a couple of weeks as he tries to make this thing happen. And we really try and delve into the science of soil science, grass science, and how we can restore the landscapes through better land use and land management practices.
Hi, great to be here. My name's Gelareh Kiazand. I made the short documentary called Preserving Taste, which is a documentary about a chef called Hanif, who is he focuses on Northern Persian cuisine, and he grew up in Iran, learning about the cuisine and learning more about the seasonality, the way that it is more about techniques and nature and how the climate affects the food. And then he takes this taste back to US, setting up a restaurant in California, which sort of has the same geographical landscape and offers the same type of ingredients. But it's mainly introducing the Persian cuisine and what it really represents, as far as its ingredients goes, as far as its techniques go.
Thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here. My name is Dena Seidel. I made the film Fields of Devotion, and I worked with farmers in New Jersey and scientists in New Jersey, and the film was documented over a year and a half. And it began with farmers who were suffering from climate change. Their crops were not growing as well, new diseases, new challenges because of extreme weather, and their dialogue with scientists. And we focused on one particular crop, which was their basil crop, because it was a high yield crop in New Jersey. 95% of our 9,000 plus farmers are small family farmers, and these type of crops are high yield, right? So they diversify. This is kind of how they stay alive. And so climate change, of course, is impacting farmers everywhere, and crops are going to need to be more disease and climate resilient. And so that dialogue, that relationship between farmers and scientists, which really come from really different cultures, which was really interesting as well, right? To see how they started to talk to each other and learn. And then we followed the whole scientific process of developing climate resilient food crops and disease resistant food crops. So it's a science film in that way, and it's then used in classrooms as well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ben Wilson. I'm a filmmaker from Central Alberta. So it's wonderful to be here with you guys, and so grateful that our film was selected for the festival. The film's called Reduce, Reuse, Ruminate, and our film's director, Sarah Ray, my partner. Sarah and I have been working on this film actually for a couple of years. It was a project that we started shooting almost 3 years ago. And it basically examines the food waste crisis that we're in Canada. And of course, Canada is not alone in that, but we looked at the Canadian context of what food waste and food loss looks like in our country, and how we can take a kind of a high level holistic approach to solving this crisis that we're in. One of the big themes through the film is looking at how ruminants, so of course the title, Ruminate, we're looking at how ruminant animals and livestock are used to divert a huge cause of food loss and food waste in Canada by taking byproducts of food processing, things like spent beer grains from brewing beer, and utilizing these high value byproducts that humans can't digest. And so taking something that would be a waste stream and turning it into a high value protein, into beef, for example, and looking at how some of these innovative solutions can help to tackle the food waste crisis in Canada. We also explore themes like greenhouse gas emissions and methane, and how it can seem a little bit paradoxical to take an animal that does create methane emissions and use that as part of the solution to the methane problem. And there are some complexities and quite a bit of misinformation around the methane cycle and cattle's role in the whole greenhouse gas discussion. You know, we hear a lot about beef being bad for the planet, or cattle being, you know, the cause of a lot of greenhouse gases, but the reality is that most of the emissions from humans are not from the food that we're producing, but from ancient carbon that we're burning for transportation, for heat, for energy. And that when we're raising animals on the land, like the other Ben, I'm sure learned about, we got three Bens in this conversation. Ben Hemmings learned from Ben Campbell, and in your film, I'm sure, Ben, that that when you have a ruminant animal that's grazing grass, they're taking that carbon into their bodies. But where did that carbon come from that's in the grass? It came from the air. So when a lot of that carbon is going back into the atmosphere through their belches, through their farts, that methane has a very short half-life, and very quickly, within a few years, turns back into carbon dioxide, which then gets uptaken into the plants again, eaten by so it's part of a biogenic natural cycle. We have tens of millions of bison across the Great Plains. It was a balanced system where methane was being produced by these animals, but it was not out of balance. You know, we didn't see a net increase in methane in the atmosphere because of the bison, and we actually have just a tiny fraction of cattle compared to. So part of our motivation for this film was to tackle some of the misinformation that's out there around the beef industry.
Great. So whether your film was about sustainability and very science-driven, or cuisine and very cultural, I've got to ask, what inspired you to make this film?
I mean, I'll go. So with the subject that I was looking at, which was very focused on Persian cuisine, specifically from the north, because it looked at sustainability. It looked at you know, what's been growing on the land and nomadic lifestyle, and how that influenced the food, specifically the Persian cuisine. I felt that there wasn't that much knowledge and information out there on that side of Persian cuisine. Like, people know it through a lot of recipes and like some of the main restaurants that are out there, but it's actually, the cuisine is so old, and it offers so many different ways of being able to eat from what's out there, what's in your vicinity, what's regional. And what was really interesting is that the way that it could be recreated in a place like California. So you can recreate exactly that type of cuisine that is in north of Iran back in California. And because of sort of the political issue that we have between the US and Iran, you're not getting the same ingredients sort of sent out there. So there's that kind of gap. And we felt that a lot was lost in that, sort of the political divide. And then, so we try to show that, oh, you could actually enjoy the same type of food and, you know, base within that region, and it has the same climate, and it's sustainable, and it offers a different view on that type of cuisine that we felt was not being seen as much. So that was the main inspiration behind it.
Yeah, for me, one of our big inspirations, me and the producer on this film, Joe, we read this article by a Canadian news agency called The Narwhal, and they do a lot of environmental stories, and they produced this series called Carbon Cache, and it was looking specifically at Canadian landscapes, but it could be applied to any corner of the globe. Looking at how, if we better manage these landscapes, we could draw gigatons of carbon out of the atmosphere. And the one that really stuck out for us was this one about the grasslands, because it kind of hit on so many environmental themes: land degradation, endangered ecosystem, land which has been largely converted to monoculture. So in the area we were in, it was all canola oil. And as you drive into the site, you just see like acres and acres and acres of canola plants. And then also to add on to what Ben Wilson said, there's so much misinformation about beef and cows' role in the environmental crisis, and also about the difference. So a big thing we touch on is the difference between, say, like feedlots versus natural grazing. And these landscapes have evolved with cows. And cows can actually be the solution to get like loads and loads of carbon into the ground while producing high protein food and feeding the planet. And yeah, through the film, you actually see the impact that him grazing the cows in this particular way has on the carbon content of the soil. So that was a big inspiration for us. And we were looking at doing a series of these, like touching on the different articles that the news agency had written, the novel, which is kind of on the back burner for now, but it's something we definitely want to revisit.
Yeah, so I'm actually a science communication researcher at Rutgers, and I've been making science films at Rutgers with scientists and students since about 2008. Most of the film projects that we've worked on have had to do with marine science, and that was a bit of my specialty. But one of my students back in 2015 had the opportunity to go to Zambia with a scientist named Dr. Jim Simon, who is a plant biologist, and they were documenting his research or the work that he does with families there. Particularly, they were actually women who were single mothers, and how they had created their own farm. And so it was really an agricultural story. And so that's how I met Dr. Jim Simon. It was during COVID that he approached me and said, for his grant, because all of the grants have a broader impact component, right? As part of their research, they need to communicate their science to the public. That's part of many federally funded research grants. So he had this project, and he had gotten a lot of awards and recognition, he and his partner, Andy Wynant, about their development. It had taken them about 10 years to develop a climate and disease-resistant basil that was now helping all these small farmers in a really significant way. And it was still it hadn't quite been fully finished, right? That process of science continues. And so he asked, it was during COVID, would I be interested in doing this story? And it was COVID, so I didn't have any students or classes at that time. And it was New Jersey. And I didn't know a lot about plant biology. So it was, again, it was an invitation, and we did it for a year and a half. I would say another part that was icing on the cake for me is because we couldn't have in-person classes during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But my high school son, who was a self-taught videographer, said he wanted to volunteer as the cinematographer. And I was allowed to do that. It was purely volunteer, but we got to do that together, film for a year and a half during COVID. So he got really into the science. Now he's a science major. So that was a very sweet part. If you see the movie, it says Dena and Micah Seidel. So that was part of the piece that made it fun and inspiring for me. We filmed for about a year and a half. Yeah. So it was really what I do now is really look at storytelling as science learning, right? As a possibility for engaging people in science through storytelling. Yeah.
So your son shot it.
That's right. And he was 16. Yeah.
Get out of here. That's incredible.
Yeah. That's
right.
Amazing.
Wow.
Well, with that said, Dena, you said you didn't know much about plant biology. What would you say, and your piece was, there's a lot of science in it.
A lot of science.
What would you say is or was your biggest challenge while making your film?
So the way that we work, the model that we use in our science communication initiative here in our School of Environmental and Biological Sciences is we document the scientific process over time. So it really is a trusting relationship with the scientists, right? Scientists are federally funded. They need to be protective of their science. That's their intellectual property. And so they generally don't let people into their labs or into their fields. So the relationship is we document it over time, science process as story, right? Story is change over time. So, and then it's all protected as science video data that is their intellectual property. But then as storytellers, I invite students to work with that footage, shape it into a story, and learn science in that process. And then we measure how the students learn science by that engagement. So what was the hardest thing? The hardest thing is, how do you take 150 hours of footage and edit it down to 30 minutes that has a lot of science-rich content, right? Because that's the mandate. We have to be communicating the science. That's what we do. So I would say I had to learn the science myself, and I do have a science background, but I didn't have that science background, and figuring out how to translate those science concepts in terms of breeding and polyploids and genetics in a way that would be science rich, but not a turnoff. It would hold the audience. Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, you did a good job because I believe you had them talking into camera and walking towards it, explaining certain concepts.
Yeah, we do it. We definitely use
digestible.
a lot of style. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it made it very digestible, and it was a great tactic. Anybody else? What was your biggest challenge while making your film?
If I can jump in there, I think mine kind of relates a little bit. I can totally appreciate, Dena, the challenge that you experienced. Ours was a little bit similar in that as the more we learned about food loss and food waste, the more we realized how overwhelming not only the problem is, but how overwhelming the information is, and how it's just such a complex system, our food systems in general. Everything is global, everything is so weather dependent. There's so many different market dynamics and forces at play, putting pressure on food producers and on consumers and everyone in the chain in between, right? And so a question like, are beef good or beef cattle good or bad for the environment is so overly simplistic and black and white. Are beef cattle part of the solution? There's so much science involved that our challenge was how do we dive into the discussion about greenhouse gases or about food waste or about feedlots and leave viewers with a sense that like they understand that discussion, they understand the topic a little bit more than they did before, without giving them information overload. And how do we do that in a 12-minute short documentary? So I think that was probably our biggest challenge.
I'll just second what both Dena and Ben said, because when I read the list of questions, I was like, okay, like I'm going to say that the most difficult thing for me is balancing making really engaging, character-driven narratives whilst also trying to educate and get as much kind of dry, dense science information into the film in an engaging way. And yeah, I do a lot of kind of science and climate change and environment-based films, and that's always kind of like the challenge is where's the balance here between learning about this character and kind of buying into the character's vision and narrative and goals, and you meet this character, how much time do we spend on character development versus education about what the character's doing?
They gotta like the character in order to digest the science, right? You gotta start with the character. You gotta care before you listen.
100%. And Ben, you did a phenomenal job of that with your film. And Ben Campbell is just an incredible character with a great story. So well done.
Thanks.
And Gelareh, what about you? Was there anything super challenging about making your film?
I think similar to what everybody was saying is sort of trying to, is the storytelling side. Well, we were, because like with the doc that we made, there was the political side to it, and then there was the food, and then there was the character. And then also my character didn't live in Iran. I was based there at the time. So trying to coordinate the timing of also when he was there, and then filming it and then pitching it and trying to get the interest of saying, okay, let's talk about a chef, and let's talk about the food that he's focusing on, and this importance about the techniques and recipes and the ingredients, and some of these recipes are being lost because they were sort of hand-me-downs from like the sort of nomadic lifestyle, and it's we're losing some of our culture in that. So trying to get the commission and the interest around a story like that was pretty difficult, because it was a balance of three different ways of telling a story. So it was hard to try to go, okay, who would be interested in seeing something like this? Because it's not very character, it's not very political, and it's not very food. It's like a mixture of all three. So I think, it was sort of finding that balance that was tricky. And it took us 3 years. Like, we filmed it across 3 years in different seasons, or seeing what would work.
So what was your experience in the subject matter you set out to tackle in your movie before production? Did any of you have experience? I know obviously we have a lot of science-driven ones. Like, what did any of you guys have experience with any of this beforehand?
I had no direct experience with the kind of looking more so at like food industry and carbon cycling and that kind of stuff. I have been making films and like fundraising videos for nonprofits in the fields of like conservation and environmental science, that kind of stuff, with some universities as well for a number of years. So I kind of, the macro themes I'm very familiar with, but for me, like, not knowing is a major part of the creative journey. If I knew everything that this guy was doing, he wouldn't be an interesting character to me. Like, that kind of discovery for me is what keeps me engaged and keeps me creatively active on a project like this.
Gelareh, what about you? You said you were based in Iran at the time?
Yeah, I was living in Tehran at the time. I had been covering stories in Iran for 6 years. So this was my first, I guess, tackle at trying to direct and shoot and write a story that is very food based. So I didn't have the experience of trying to tell that type of story, but as a person who is obsessed with food and just learning about it and all the stories behind it, we were researching on trying to see how to do it best. But it's such an amazing world, and just seeing all the different stories that it brings about, like looking at the climate side, at the science side, it's phenomenal. The broadness of what food can bring.
Was food a major part of your life before the film, or at all?
I mean, like with like Persian families, it's always like the grandmother cooking, and then like learning from them, and sort of like it's a lot of like pass me down recipes, and you learn a lot of it just at the home, and it's about community and people coming together. So, I feel like, I definitely grew up in a very foodie family, where it's like, what are you cooking? What are we learning? How are we? Let's experiment together and bring people together around the table with food. So that's why I definitely wanted to dive in more and see what is it that we don't know about, like the cuisines, and like what they can offer in terms of ingredients, in terms of like techniques, and how it relates back to nature and the climates that we live in, essentially.
And Dena, how about you? I know you said that you knew nothing about plant biology, but
Yeah, and also I hadn't spent a lot of time on farms. And so I think the opportunity to go and meet with the farmers and learn about the struggles that they were having, really just incredibly how hard they work. And I'd worked on a farm years ago when I was a teenager, but I hadn't been at a farm that was, this is really how they're making their living, what are the challenges they're facing. And now in this time of climate change, that was really was very meaningful. And I think that's really how we started the story, even though we were approached by the scientists. Would you be interested in explaining what we're doing and turning this into a story, and including students so that they can learn? And so, again, that's what we do, is learning science through storytelling. But we went right to the farmers, and the farmers are the ones that speak because of course, they're the ones that are most impacted, and they're the ones who are the beneficiaries of and needing the climate resilient and disease resistant food crops. So that was that was really special. It's an honor to have those to earn the trust. And that took a while. It took a while to earn the trust of the farmers and to be able to be there with them. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, something that we talk about a lot during these discussions is earning the trust and the bond that is created between the person, the director, and really the crew, and everyone else that's involved in the film. Ben, how about you?
Well, Julian, I love what you just said there, and it actually makes me think of so my partner Sarah and I, our company is called Story Brokers Media House, and we came up with that name because we view it as exactly what you just said, that we're so honored to be in a position where we can kind of broker the sharing of stories. As filmmakers, we can try to build that trust and hold space for someone to share their story, and then help them to reach people that maybe wouldn't ever have a chance to hear that story. But we're the in-between link in that process. That it's something that we really treasure, the opportunity to be able to do that. And in the agriculture space, that I think it's so important that we have people that are sharing those stories, that can take something incredible or something innovative or something tragic that one individual food producer is experiencing and sort of amplify that story. In terms of our experience with the subject matter, Sarah did grow up on a farm. I did not. But for the last 12 years, we've been really heavily focused in telling a lot of food and agriculture and farming stories. And what was maybe a little bit unique about this film was that, as opposed to like Ben sharing the specific story of Grazed Right and Ben Campbell's one operation, we were trying to take a systems level view, or capture and share a systems level view of agriculture and food waste across a whole country and all these whole systems. So we would film at one food bank location in southern Alberta, but make sure that, okay, are we telling the story of representative of how food banks in general kind of operate in our country, or are we telling the specific story of this person that we're interviewing? And the same with a feedlot operator or a farmer who's doing something really crazy and cool and new, but recognizing and putting some research into making sure that that this isn't just an outlier. Maybe it's new information to most people, but like that there is this is something that's happening in every province across Canada, that farmers are finding innovative ways to make use of byproducts of food processing, as an example. So we put so much energy into growing and harvesting and separating that little grain of wheat or barley from the stalk, and then throwing everything away that isn't, or maybe composting it or whatever, but really what humans use and what we digest is such a small part of what is actually grown. And there are so many great stories across Canada of ways that that producers are starting to capture more of what was being lost or wasted before, and wanting to just share that. So we did have to do a lot of research for this film, and learned a lot.
Yeah, well, you did do a lot of research. You could tell. The information on the carbon methane cycle was something that had a pretty big impact on me. I obviously knew it, but I think you did a really good job of illustrating it. Which brings me to my next question: is what impact were you hoping to have with your film?
Well, that portion of the film that you're talking about specifically was one that comes to mind for me in terms of the impact that we hope to have, for sure. And that is just shedding a little bit more light on really how this complex system works of the carbon cycle, the methane cycle, carbon that's part of a natural cycle versus carbon that was in the ground for millions of years, and now we're burning it and putting it in the atmosphere. and how drastic that difference is in terms of the net impact on climate change. And so I think a big desire that we had was to make people stop and just rethink some of their assumptions, or reconsider some of the information that they've heard about our food systems, about agriculture in general, especially beef production as part of that system. And hopefully, maybe this is naive, but I honestly would love that, to know that somebody, after watching our film, wasted less food. Or just thought about, their purchasing choices and the way that they are part of the system and can be part of the solution in their eating habits, in their, maybe just simple things like how you're storing your food so that you're not throwing leftovers away, how you're organizing things in your fridge. Waste has always really troubled me, and so this was a film subject that was close to my heart. My kids call me the household garburator, the human garburator, because they all bring me their leftovers, because I can't stand to see food thrown in the garbage. So yeah, I hope that people rethink what the assumptions they had about beef production, about agriculture, about food systems, and also just about their own consumer choices and behaviors.
I can share something that's been a surprising impact, and that is the way that this Fields of Devotion has really served as like a convening tool in a way, bringing communities together. And I think it's been really exciting to see how farmers and researchers or plant scientists, agricultural scientists come together and talk, that the farmers are now more sharing the challenges that they're facing and asking for collaboration, because without knowing what the problems are, then the scientists can't start helping, right? Our team also works in Micronesia, which is the background that I have. And Micronesia, the Federated States of Micronesia, which is one of our science projects, which of course has communication pieces as well, but it's one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change. And a lot of the people live on atolls. And so their crops are being, flooded with salt water. So they're going to need saltwater resilient food crops, just as our New Jersey and US farmers are needing more climate resilient crops that can handle either heat or cold or different diseases. So if that conversation or communication isn't going on between the farmers and the scientists, we're not going to have a food system. So that was what was exciting, is they kept using this movie as a convening tool. And it wasn't something that we initiated it, but it would be this agriculture board of this particular county. And it was just really nice. It was really nice to hear that knowledge sharing and people breaking down barriers and talking more and thinking about ways to collaborate to protect our food system. The other thing I want to shout out to Zania Morin, who's our associate producer, and she's been bringing this film into high schools, into biology classes and environmental science classes. And I think it's been changing perceptions about what science can be. So afterwards, we find out that a bunch of students are now interested in going to farms, meeting with the farmers, or going into the plant biology lab. So there's been it's just been exciting to see that it's been useful that way. I think those are the impacts that we were hoping for, and some that were surprising as well.
That's amazing. Yes, that's a great way. That's a great little add-on to the question. Like, what impact were you hoping to have, and have you had any impacts?
For me, like Ben, I was just thinking, like, if one farmer changes their practices because they get inspired by like the film, then I was coming at it from like a carbon angle. Like, if the amount of carbon that one farmer could capture, or the amount of land that they could restore just by changing their farming practices, would massively offset like the kind of the input that I put into it, even the carbon input that I put into it, flying out to Alberta and all that kind of stuff. This is what goes through my mind. But one of our big funders for this project was Nature United, which is the Canadian sister company of the Nature Conservancy in the States. And yeah, Jacqueline Nunez there has been great, and she's really pushing this in front of kind of like bigger audiences within the industry, and she's trying to she's using the film to drum up some kind of government level change or lobbying. So we're hoping that we can make some real kind of systemic impact across Canada with the film.
If I could just give a quick shout out to Mark Orton, who did the music for our movie, because I did think that it had a big impact on our impact, right? That it made the film very kind of welcoming and warm, and I think really the farmers really related to it. So Mark Orton, we were very super lucky that he provided us with his beautiful music. Thank you.
Awesome. And Gelareh, what about you?
I mean, for us, it was really important to introduce a certain ingredients actually from Iran that no one, especially plant-based ones, that not a lot of people either knew was used in Persian cuisine or even in any type of cuisine, and to kind of show how easy it is to sort of, you know, cook well within your own vicinity and actually keep it seasonal. And you don't have to, it doesn't have to be too, I guess, you know, you can keep it simple and it still can and offer so much flavor, and really introduce Persian cuisine in a different light. We felt like it wasn't it because when we did research on it, we realized it wasn't that well known. It wasn't that talked about, especially it's one of the cuisines that's very regional, that's very seasonal, and in it again, like because of the nomadic influence that it had, it was very based around how people's lifestyle was. So it was also introducing a culture. So we really wanted to shed some light on that, especially at a time when a lot of what you hear from Iran is politics. So we're like, okay, well, let's look at the food. Let's look at what it can offer, and hope that you know, we can educate people in sort of all the herbs and ingredients and what people are using within the recipes. So yeah, I'm not sure what type of impact it's had. It hasn't really, it's just starting to sort of, we're starting to show it around. So it's hard to, I don't know. But yeah, that's the hope that we have.
Well, I could tell you from me after watching, it was really nice to see, because like you said, a lot, especially in America, a lot of the images that we're seeing are of a political nature. And it's always great when docs that are kind of showing cultural traditions, it is very specific to those cultures, but at the same time, it's very universal. So you see a piece of yourself, a piece of your family in them. And that's what makes it very moving. And that was the impact that it had on me. So very well done.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to hear.
Last but not least, my friends, what other projects are in store? What's up next?
So I have a film that I just finished this year, and called Salted Earth, going back to what Dena said about the atolls in the Pacific and saltwater intrusion coming in. But it was actually filmed in the mid-Atlantic, so Delaware, Maryland, because a lot of the coastal land there, because of the rate of sea level change there, you're getting a lot of ghost forests. The forests are being burned out by salt. And farmers and landowners having to either shift crops or like they're not able to produce on their land anymore. So we actually visited a farm that the scientists are studying on, where when they started the study, it was a completely arable field. And 1 year into the study, the entire field is no longer productive and the farmer's given up on it. So that's currently making the film, doing the film festival rounds this year. And then, yeah, next project, very early stages. Actually, okay, yeah, I won't even go into that now. That's a whole other thing. But yeah, that's my main thing at the moment, is the film Salted Earth that we finished this year.
Very exciting.
Dena,
So
I can send you a link for that if you want to see it.
Yeah, I would totally. I'd actually want to, yeah, I would think about maybe how we could show it at Rutgers as well.
Please.
Let's see if it makes sense in terms of food systems, right? So, I think anyway, what I do again, because I'm a science communication researcher, so we do have a lot of footage on a few different stories that we've got going right now that have to do with. It includes ghost forests as well, Ben, and in New Jersey. We're looking at the marshes along the coast of New Jersey, where many of the fish, the migratory fish that are passing through the Mid-Atlantic Bight, they're spending a large percentage of their life cycle. It's a nursery, and how scientists have been documenting that change over time. There's a long-term series, 30-year series by Dr. Ken Abel. They've been in the very same location collecting the fish larvae to see how they have changed over 30 years. And it's a real indication of climate change, because many of those species that were southern species are now the primary species. The species that used to dominate have moved north, right? So and it's all connected to the New Jersey marine food system. So that's one project. We also have another project that it's an international team of scientists that are studying the hydrothermal vents along the East Pacific Rise. And their big research question is, basically how did these ecologies, these communities form? It's 1.5 miles down. They go down in the Alvin, they go down in the submarines, or they use different remote operating vehicles to collect the samples, but they're looking at how the microbiofilms, the very first microbes that are able to digest the chemicals coming out of those vents, those underwater volcanoes, and then be able to provide food for those animals, the tube worms and all the different larvae that settle. So that's fun. It's really a fun project. We have about 400 hours of footage, and then we invite the students to work with that footage. And then many of the students, almost all of them, have science backgrounds. So they're shaping that footage as part of their science communication, but they're really learning along the way. They're learning all different aspects of the science, because it's a pretty complex project. So those are my stories. Very, very science-based, but yeah, thank you.
It sounds amazing, Dena. I'd love to see that when it's finished, and yours as well, Ben. So Sarah and I are actually working on another film right now that relates sort of to both of your stories, where we are actually looking at wildlife conservation through farming best practices across Canada, and how these pockets of wild spaces where cattle are grazing, they're actually cohabitating with a lot of Canada's species at risk. So when you look at the concentrations of where Canada's species at risk are living, and where they're migrating, and where they're stopping along migration paths, or where they're breeding, or where they're feeding and finding water, a lot of it is concentrated in the places where cattle are being grazed, because cattle don't use that entire habitat. They just move through it. They graze, like Ben rotating his cattle, they graze the grass, they move on, the grass gets to rest, and there's birds, there's snakes, there's bears, there's the Canada's lynx, which is an endangered species, can live in that shared ecosystem with those beef cattle. And so we're looking at, sort of like the food waste crisis. We have so many populations of so many different species in Canada that are declining and disappearing and endangered, that what can we be doing as food producers, as at an agriculture systems level, again, to try to conserve those spaces and share nature with wildlife. So we're still shooting right now for that film. We don't have a working title yet, actually, but it's going to be a similar length, probably 12 or 13-minute short doc about wildlife habitat conservation. And it's been absolutely fascinating and inspiring meeting farmers across Canada. We've filmed in, I think, 4 different provinces so far, and meet people that just are, it brings you to tears almost, hearing their stories of the lengths that they go to and the dedication that they have to going above and beyond just what they have to do or need to do to keep their business viable, but go way beyond to also make sure that the water is clean for the wildlife that are moving through, or that that when they're moving their cattle, that they're avoiding the nesting grounds of this specific burrowing owl or species of birds that migrates through their farm. So just that they're aware of these things and going to the lengths that they go to is just, it's so cool to learn about. So we're excited to share some of those stories.
Well, right now, I worked with Hanif Sadr, who's the chef in this documentary, and he has a company called Kamaj that has been mapping out a lot of these herbs and these ingredients, basically recreating it back in California, since we can't really send it in from Iran. And he's expanding this. So we're hoping, because this one was very focused on northern Persian food. So we're looking at now seeing how we can do the rest, look at the rest of the country and try to map out their ingredients and sort of what their cuisines are. And then that's one, and the other one's actually about music. So that's a whole different topic, but it's actually looking at music in Iran. But yeah, these are the projects that are kind of boiling up.
I would love to know about your music in Iran.
Yeah,
That
me
sounds
too. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I'll definitely I'll let everyone know. Yeah, once we get the
a
thumbs
really
up.
impressive group. It's really an honor. Thank you for bringing us all
Yeah,
together.
very.
I'm
Yeah.
impressed
Yeah,
with-
thank you, Julian.
Oh, of
Yeah,
course.
thank you so
Congratulations,
much.
everybody.
yeah, thanks everyone.
Nice to meet you all.
Good luck.
Thanks, Julian.